Hello and welcome to NewsClick. After a fairly long gap, an India-Pakistan peace meeting was held in Delhi over 3 days earlier this month, involving several organizations, activists and individuals who have in fact been working for long in establishing peace and friendly relations between India and Pakistan. This initiative comes at a time when relations between the two South Asian neighbors have been at a frosty low, with India in particular refusing to resume talks with Pakistan on the grounds that Pakistan is not preventing, if not actually facilitating, cross-border terrorism. In this context, what role can such people-to-people meetings or activities play, particularly in prodding the two governments to resume talks and pave the way for friendly relations? To discuss this, we have with us today Seema Mustafa, veteran journalist, and in fact one of the co-organizers of this event.
See, there have always been voices that eventually it is the governments and what can civil society do, what can the people do. It is for the governments to decide whether there's going to be war, whether there's going to be peace. But over the years of being, or at least watching or being part of this peace process to some extent, you realize how important it is. How important it is to talk of sanity at a time when governments appear insane. And this is happening, for the last 20 years where the peace process has picked up and you find little groups from both sides talking to each other despite the odds. Of course, there is one big establishment lobby of peace activists who come in only when the governments say that there is peace. Like the media in India, you'll suddenly get peace headlines when the prime ministers go across. But I think this sustained effort against all odds, against opposition from the establishment and the governments to talk of peace and to remind people of the consequences of war is extremely important. And I think civil society is being able to do that, even if in a minuscule way, it's important.
Seema, there was a time when such efforts were, at least to some extent, encouraged by the governments of both India and Pakistan. Today, however, it seems to me that such meetings are swimming against the current, and that government on both sides of the border are to some extent hostile to such initiatives. Am I right?
Yes, I think they got increasingly hostile after Bombay. They pretended at one level that, yes, well, we are going to continue the channels. But, when governments don't talk for a couple of years, then even track 2 winds down, track 3 starts winding down, and the levels of communication dip dramatically. So I think, when we were organizing and we thought of organizing this conference, this was about 6 months ago. And at that time, there was still some talk that perhaps they might resume the dialogue. So we thought that though we are aiming for January, the talks could have probably begun in December or November. It didn't happen. In fact, the atmosphere has worsened to a point where now they are again threatening each other with war, right, and talking about, cold start, nuclear option, as if they're talking about something like, pebbles and peanuts.
We in India are quite used to seeing our government being averse to resumption of relations, refusing dialogue. Our media is full of discussions blaming all Pakistanis, the entire Pakistan, the government, for every single act that happens here, and there is an atmosphere of hostility. I observed during the conference, a bit to my surprise, that a similar atmosphere seems to be prevailing in Pakistan as well. The testimony of the young journalist from Balochistan, for instance, of the hostility with which his visit to India to attend this conference was greeted.
Now that you're referring to Balochistan, I think there was a slight sad point there. There is not just the government that was opposing Balochistan, but senior members of civil society as well. And this boy, he's a young journalist, obviously not of the Punjabi elite of Pakistan, and he braved a lot of odds to come. And he was interrogated, etc., etc. And then when he came here, he found that some of the senior members of the Pakistani delegation were not supporting him, which really made him very scared of what he was going to say. So he did say
what he was going to face when he went back.
And so then we had to, talk to other members and sort of ensure some level of safety, which is really nothing.
Sure.
So it is sad that even in the peace movement, it hasn't come to grips with a lot of civil rights issues within that country as well.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting in the conference to look at the kinds of responses one is getting from the other side of the border. That was certainly useful for Indian participants. But you do see that there is an increasing hostility on both sides, in both India and in Pakistan?
Yes, because we've been having, as journalists, some interactions with very, very senior officials of the MEA. And the dialogue right now is hard, that they don't know what they're saying. Even those who talk of peace are not really talking of peace, meaning even civil society is rubbish. And the suspicion seems to be growing to a point. I don't know what point they want to take it to, particularly after the IPL, which was absolutely dismal. And it was very clear that the Indian government was involved in tweaking the responses of all these rich and pretty people. But even the reactions now coming from Pakistan, some of them are really over the top. And it is like you have a license to do whatever you want from both sides and say whatever you want.
Seema, you were saying earlier that in this context, it was very important to keep alive some process of dialogue between some sections of civil society, in particular in India and Pakistan, and building a constituency for peace. But somehow I get the sense, having observed such interactions and initiatives over the past several years, that this India-Pakistan constituency for peace seems to be getting frozen. One sees the same people and one is not breaking into new sections. Do you also share this perception, and what do you think can be done to expand this constituency for peace?
Well, one was getting it, and one does get it at times, that, it's the same people doing the same thing, saying the same thing. But I was particularly happy at this conference in January, where you suddenly saw that they were not all people like us, as it was. And a lot of young people were there who participated and sat through 3 days of the deliberations, which were intensely political. And that was an interesting development. And when you're involved in something which is very, very difficult, then even these little signals are important.
What next, and what other steps do you think need to be taken to build on this process and to expand this peace constituency in both countries?
Yeah, because there are some people who have been on this India-Pakistan peace thing for a long time, and often with NGOs and activists it becomes a turf war, that it is my turf. I think the first realization has to be, at least on our side and even across, is that the turf is so big that the more and more people get attached, even then there will be too few, because you're really up against odds. So I think the whole idea should be now to expand into groups that were not really involved. Identify those groups, make sure that they participate, even if they might not say exactly what is music to your ears. At least if they are present, they are going to be listening to the others. And in the interaction, maybe they will shed some of those very extreme positions that they are taking. So I think the reaching out is important, which has not been happening at the pace that we should have because of this whole turf business that we have. And I think the media also, all this, Times of India, Jang, Aman Ki Asha, between two warring groups. Like we've been saying that first they have to understand the Aman Ki Bhasha before they go on for this Asha. These are all establishment-provoked kind of little initiatives which will be called off. So, but I think a real beginning should be made between the media, maybe just the media. And you should have targeted, maybe just media, maybe lawyers, maybe academics, where they decide and where they, where we discuss how we can soften reporting and how we should listen to the other side before we report on India-Pakistan events.
So thank you again, Seema.